The God Trip, a DMT trip report sent in by Great Home Greens, originally from Reddit. Let me preface this by saying I thought I had already had a spiritual awakening, but this was like that times 100. This has to be the craziest trip I've ever been on, and from how I see it now, the last trip I will ever need to go on for the purpose of seeking information. It had been a while since I tripped, and I kept feeling more and more cold over the last couple of days to do it. Specifically, because I was working out some ideas on how to picture the structure of the universe based on my previous trips and what I had seen, I have strong memories of seeing these ever-changing 4D beings that gave me the impression that our observable universe was a 3D cross-section of a 4D item. I loaded approximately 40 milligrams of DMT into a bong, sandwiched in between about half a bowl of weed. I lit it carefully with the flame as far back as possible and tried to smoke it as slowly as I could without losing the cherry. It took 2 full hits to clear the bowl. The first hit seemed like mostly weed, but the second hit was lots of DMT. I held it in both times until there was no more smoke, and when I exhaled, the second time everything started to go through that familiar but foreign change. I never really feel like I blast off per se. Most times I just go through a sort of fade out of reality. It's like everything starts to look and feel more and more foreign until I am suddenly no longer a body, and my consciousness is fully there. I was greeted by the exact being I had been thinking about. To me, it does not seem like the typical entity that I read about in other people's trip reports, but more like a sentient mass of constantly changing 3-dimensional objects. I was so excited to see it, and I began trying to ask if it was the source of my 3D reality like I had been thinking. As I excitedly tried to remember and ask the questions I had, I wasn't presented with answers as much as just a feeling to look closer. So I tried really hard to observe and remember the details of what I was looking at. Focusing closer on what I was looking at, I was immediately struck with just how complex this thing really was. From a distance, it appeared to be almost shaped like a wave, or maybe I could more accurately call it a flailing funnel or tornado-like tunnel with a constantly changing surface made out of seemingly every shape. I remember seeing gears, propellers, eyes, people, figures, animal figures. All the shapes would move and dance and stay around as long as they were observed, but disappear instantly when they were in the foreground. The shapes seemed to get big enough to see them when I observed them, but shrink away when I didn't. It seemed like just by looking at it, I could zoom in on its surface and observe it closer. As I zoomed in, I noticed the whole thing that seemed chaotic from a distance was actually a perfectly structured fractal, but not like any fractal I had ever seen before. This was made entirely out of 3D objects instead of lines. It was almost like what looked like the lines of this fractal were actually made out of the timelines of each of the 3D objects inside it. By looking at any part of it, it was like I was able to look at a small part of it in time. It's like what looked like a line was actually a moving film reel or a zoetrope rotating to create motion that played out each frame of the image at every point of itself. As soon as my focus would shift, each object would melt back into the fractal and be replaced by new objects in the centre of my focus doing the same types of things. The amount of depth to this thing is completely indescribable to the human mind. Even now picturing it and writing this is so hard because I can only remember as much as my limited brain can comprehend. I could feel that the being could tell I was observing it closer, and trying desperately to get some answers. I was now even more convinced that what I was seeing was a far more complex version of what I would normally see as reality. Like I was somehow outside of time and this was the 4D fractal physical version of it. Suddenly, I also had this immediate understanding of how people saw such crazy things on a breakthrough, because I could tell that when looking at this object I could literally see anything. It's like I understood the mechanisms of how a DMT trip worked. How if I was a little bit closer to this, I would maybe fall into one of those timelines and see something crazy. Once I understood this, I heard, "Ask and you shall receive." And I got plucked entirely out of the realm with this being and pulled up to what my brain can only try to describe as possibly the highest observable dimension of reality. I was immediately awestruck, dumbfounded, filled with joy, horrified and amazed all at once. I was at the centre of it all. The DMT had told me before about the source of all creation, but I hadn't seen it. I knew now more than I knew anything else that this is where and what that centre was. I've tried to describe what I was looking at. It seems like I can fully remember it, but the memory has to have been modified to fit my perception, since truly describing what I saw or even perceiving it from my current viewpoint would be like a brick trying to describe how to build itself into a wall. I was looking at what seemed to be a beautifully constructed platform in the very centre of an equally beautiful and complex multicoloured ocean. The ocean was not flat, but one of those massive sphere-like structures where the top and bottom points curve back inward. to create a tunnel through the middle. The platform was in the very centre of this middle tunnel structure, and standing on it was what I can only describe as a robed figure, with kind of a golden looking wise and loving but mostly indescribable face. Its arms were stretched upwards and out, and its feet were together, and the tunnel emanated out of the top of the robed figure's hands, creating this entire ocean, and was then reabsorbed into the bottom of the platform up through its feet. The entire ocean seemed to be constructed like one of the fractal beings from earlier, but so much further zoomed out. At this level, it was even more complex than when I had been trying to observe the earlier being. The entire ocean was so brightly coloured and flowed constantly. Every colour possible made up each fractal wave, and they all seemed to contrast each other so much more than any colours I had ever seen. From here, any point I looked I could see entire universes being born, and destroyed in each point I focused my attention, instead of mere 3D objects. Some of these universes were very simple, some just as complex as ours, some beyond my imagination. I could see that this was truly everything, and that the entire universe that humans know is just a single thought in a sea of infinite thoughts, seemingly created and destroyed in an instant just for fun. I felt so overwhelmed, but equally thankful for this blessed knowledge. I felt like I now knew everything. I was so overwhelmed, and it was so much to take in, and the robed figure seemed like it was highly amused because I had asked for this. Don't know exactly how long I stayed in this place. It felt so amazing, yet so far beyond my little existence. When I finally started coming back, I could see clearly as I fell back into this sea and towards my base reality. I started slowly getting smaller and smaller, starting to come back down through different complex realities, like landing on an interdimensional aeroplane. Then at some point I could see our wave, then our universe, then the earth, and then my room, as I was placed back into my body. The roof seemed to close in on me, and I could see something waving goodbye as it did. Felt like I got placed back into a box and then the lid got put on. The smooth transition into my body made all of this seem even more real than it already did. As I continued to come down, I could still fully understand what I'd been shown and the significance and weight of it. As soon as I had some control over my body, I started screaming. Not out of fear, but just because I was so completely overwhelmed that it was involuntary. I screamed with no words for a while, and then gained a tiny bit of complexion and got up and started screaming, "I'm not supposed to know this! I was just supposed to live my life!" I had never felt so free yet so insignificant at once. It's like I know way more than any human is supposed to know. The video game character realising it's a video game character. I can see now that everything that happens here doesn't matter whatsoever at all, and yet we still exist for a reason. This is all just something to experience for a moment. Possibly to fulfill some cosmic purpose, possibly to balance something out, possibly to entertain someone, possibly to just fill a gap in infinity. We could be a rerun for all I know. All I know now is this. I'm no longer afraid of anything at all. When I die, it will be like a death in a play or a movie. Simply to create the emotions all those watching are supposed to feel. Simply to deepen the illusion of this experience itself. When I die, I don't have to reincarnate, because I am already everywhere.